We're starting a new theme this month. And our theme for May is discipleship. Now, I know a lot of times that the only time we even think of that word, disciple, is when we're thinking about the 12 people who followed Jesus. I'm going to ask you to take me out of the monitors, please. And they are perhaps representatives of what it means to be a disciple, but we're all disciples of something. Just hang with me for a minute. We are all disciples of something. See, the disciple follows something, and they follow it wholeheartedly. They follow it voluntarily. It captures their imagination, and it captures their attention. They become advocates for it. They become places and spaces of expression of it. That the disciple is so closely aligned with whatever it is that they are following that there's a sense of identity and oneness with it. And I'm not saying this disparagingly about any body in particular or any products or services. You know, I'm a Mac gal. I like Apple products, I'm not going to lie. And there are many people out in the world who are disciples of Apple. They are Mac disciples. I mean, there's like nothing that gets them more excited than the latest thing that's coming. They're looking, they're surfing, the net, they're paying attention, they're buying all the little gadgets. And so what Apple knows is that they have this ready-made market. That these people love their product so much that the moment they come out with something new, they just can't get enough of it. Okay? Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not putting a judgment on that. I'm just using that as an example to say that we're all disciples of something. Some people are disciples of the news. Just news junkies. Morning, noon, and night. The moment the get home, turn on the news. The computer's like, turn on the news. Emails flying back and forth. Just constant conversation about what everybody else is doing in the news. Okay? We become a disciple of the news. A wholehearted follower. They don't need to sell the newspapers, because we're telling it for them. We become the advocates of whatever that is. Even the stuff we don't like. Catch that. A lot of the news that we're busy sharing and talking about is not news that we like or even want to see in the world. But we've become such a disciple of being the disseminator of the news that unbeknownst to us, sometimes we're actually colluding with the very things that we don't want by the amount of attention that we give it. I want you to catch that. You wound up colluding with things sometimes by the amount of attention that you give it. This is different than putting your head in the sand like an ostrich. I'm not saying get into the metaphysical bypass or where you don't see anything. What I am saying is that pain pushes until vision pulls. Pain pushes until vision pulls. So what then becomes the goal of your attention? What becomes the goal of your attention? And once again, it's not a criticism. I'm saying that there's a stage of maturation and growth. So if you are first starting in a 12-step program, the focus of your attention initially is just going to be on not drinking. Like 1 minute at a time. Then eventually you'll get into that sense of recovery. And at some point in time, the vision of sobriety has to carry you. Not just the pain of trying not to drink or trying not to use, but a vision of sobriety, a vision of something bigger and greater. Pain pushes until vision pulls. And too many of us are afraid sometimes that if I don't have those things that are needling me and bugging me, that I would just live a life of complacency and do nothing. Many people are actually afraid that to live the spiritual life means that somehow or another they're going to live some static, emotionless, just bliss. Just above it all, bliss. The deeper you go in your spirituality, the higher you will be called. The deeper you go in your spirituality, you will not be able to rest without being of service. The deeper that you go in your spirituality, the greater the oneness that you're going to see of the interconnectedness between you and all things. You don't get a ticket up into not feeling or not doing anything. Quite the contrary. The more that you grow in the discipleship of the divine, the more your heart will bleed. The more you won't even be able to stay intransigent in your own side, the more you'll be able to have compassion even for your so-called opposition. The more you won't be able to stand in the middle of the family drama and point fingers. Your heart will hurt because you'll see how everybody's hurt. Your heart will hurt because you begin to see how there's a little bit of truth in what everybody is saying. And you won't be so smug on your side about who's wrong. The more that we grow in our spirituality, the deeper that our roots are and the higher that we're called to do something else. This reading that we had from Dr. Howard Thurman, I'm actually going to share it again at the end of my message so that it gets recorded for those who are watching the In the Light program. The television show picks up with the music and doesn't get the reading and the affirmations in there. And I think it's really important reading, and I'll talk a little bit later about the importance of Dr. Thurman's, who's the author of the reader, his work and the things that we're doing. This notion of discipleship, hot off the press. When I was checking in this morning for my spiritual definitions, and once again, these definitions always are a formula. It's where these things energetically converge, because everything is energy. Everything is energy. There's something that we bring to the table that meets something that's already there. And it described discipleship as that place where our dedicated service is infused by divine purposes. Catch that. Infused with divine purposes. Next week, I'm going to bring the dictionary with infused. But I think most of us have a sense of that word. When you infuse something, there's a way that it enters into it and it permeates it so that it's not relegated to or compartmentalized to one little section. When something is infused with something, the mark of it is everywhere. So can you imagine if in the dedicated service of your life, it was infused with divine purposes? Can you imagine if your life stopped being about stuff? If our life stopped being about materialism or the bidding of our ego, and our life really started to become about some divine purposes, how different would your life be? What happens for most of us is that we are like that seed upon the wind that Dr. Thurman wrote about, where we are taking our cue from the issue du jour. We're just floating around out there with anything and everything that's going on. We don't have any anchoring. We don't have any centering. We don't have any mooring. Beware. Beware of this technological age that we're living in. because it is playing off of that. We are taking such pride in multitasking that we are losing our ability to be still. Where our beta attention is running and running and running so much, and you find God in the stillness of your being. It's when you stop. You don't find God digging through your problem and trying to tear it all apart and analyze it. It's when you step back for a moment, when you breathe. Even that moment of falling on our knees is that moment when we quit trying to fix it. Where a window of opening happens to see and to hear things a little differently. But you don't have to be beat down by life to listen. One of my personal sayings is, I'm going to start off on my knees because I'm going to wind up there anyway. So I'm just going to beat the rush and get ahead of it because drama is optional. I'm hearing something somebody told me like 20 years ago. I remember because I was just starting to come into the Santa Cruz area, and I was back in Los Angeles, and she has this wonderful Texas accent. And she demonstrated. She said to me, she says, you know, every now and then I can feel the hand of God on the small of my back. She says, and I turn around and say, don't push. She said, and I just get to stepping a little faster. She said, because when you have been pushed by God, you have truly been pushed. The root of our word discipline comes from the root of disciple. Just let that sink for a second. The root of discipline is discipleship. We tend to think of discipline as something punitive or something punishing. The discipline is put upon us by something external to try to make us conform to something. Oh no. True discipline comes from the inside out. I want you to catch that. True discipline comes from the inside out. Discipline is your act of discipleship. When you have a discipline with a particular thing, dance. We have a lot of surfers in the house. Takes discipline. How many times do you fall off that board? And you keep getting back up. We have musicians in the house. It takes discipline to practice and to play. It takes discipline to have a healthy relationship. A lot of discipline. I don't care what kind of relationship it is. From parenting to partnering to co-workers to being a global citizen. It takes a certain amount of discipline. I believe it was last week for Easter that we were singing a song that comes from the book of Romans in the Bible about stir up the gifts. A more literal translation would be like fanning the flames. And in this, Paul is writing to Timothy. And he's explaining to Timothy, is it the book of Timothy? Okay, I messed up. I think of Paul, I think of Romans. In the book of Timothy, Paul is writing to Timothy and explaining to Timothy that I see in you the same kind of dedication and spirit and fire and passion that I saw in your mother and in her mother. Okay? Now, how many times am I talking about begotten? How we're begotten. He says, I see it in you. And he says, fan those flames, stir up those gifts. He says, God has not given us a spirit of fear. Fear is actually not the best translation for the word that's being used there. Cowardice would be a better translation. Timidity. That we have not been given a spirit like of weakness or timidity. It says, we have been given a spirit of power. The ability to do. We have been given a spirit of power, love. This is not the emotional love. This is the agapeo love. Once again, a discipline, a direction of the will, a choice love, a choice to stay connected in oneness, whether you have affinity or affection or not, that we have been given the spirit of that. Spirit is breath. It's the same concept of the infusion, that we are infused with this spirit of power, the ability to do, the ability to stay connected because we understand our divine lineage and heritage. It says, and sound mind. The literal translation of the word that we're using for sound mind is discipline. Discipline. Now, mind you, if you have enough discipline, you will develop into what looks like a sound mind. When people are not in a sound mind, they are not in a position to be disciplined. Yes? But God has given us a spirit of power. Check it out. The relationship between these things, the ability to do, but not just do any old thing. That God has given us the discipline over our power and has given us the love, the connectedness with all things. Now, can you imagine if you always used your power with love and discipline? Where would you be if you used your power, the spirit that we have, not a spirit of timidity and cowardice? Stand up. Stand up. Don't let your problems ride you. Martin Luther King used to always say the only way a man can ride your back is if you're bent over. Stand up. I don't care what your problems are. Stand up. Declare the I am somebody. See, this is the discipleship that I'm talking about, where it's not contingent upon everything that's going on, where you have a dedicated service. We did a reading a couple of weeks ago from Maintaining Your Vision out of Your Deepest Intent. And it was saying that you have to, this particular letter at this point was actually directed to Valerie Joy. And it was using her calling to music. And saying you have to get to the point where it doesn't matter. You have to get to the point where if you were homeless on the street, you would still sing. You have to get to the point where if everything was going wrong, you would still be available for the music that's trying to come through you. See, you could be in the fire of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And that's not going to stop you. This dedicated service that I'm talking about is not a place of our ego. It's not a place of ego. It's a place where you show up with a yes in your heart. I was using earlier the example of what happens when you start to go into recovery. And part of being in recovery is giving service. Because when we become so self-absorbed in what we're doing, we can't get out of our victimized consciousness. We can't see possibility. So when we start doing something, when we start making a contribution, we begin to step into that spirit of power. And I want to say this specifically to the parents. Give your children opportunities to make a contribution. Give your children opportunities to develop discipline. I'm not saying this in judgment of parenthood. But that ability to be in control of oneself is going to be important to their being able to experience their spiritual power. So they don't perceive themselves as just being blown around by anything and everything that's going on in the world. I had many avenues to develop the discipline. Through scouting, through sports, through music, through drama, through school and church and all of these other places. It is so extremely important. I just got back in the wee hours of the morning. I spent the last couple of days at Yale Law School. And it's this wonderful social justice project, like the next leg of it, something I've been working on for a number of years. And most of the work that I had been doing over the past few years has been facilitating these quote-unquote progressive think tanks, but primarily more on the religious end, about moving things forward through communities of faith. And for the last couple of days, I was with my legal comrades, law professors from some of the most prestigious schools. Like 3/4 of them were law professors who do research and all kinds of things. And I came really very close to being a lawyer. Really, really close to being a lawyer. And as I was with them, I realized if I hadn't said yes, I would have been them. And that's not a judgment. It was just kind of like this awareness that if I had not said yes, I would have been one of the civil rights lawyers. And when I thought about what it was that they were doing, and that I am so grateful for it, and I have another calling. That I personally am not called to be a disciple of the law. I'm glad there are disciples of the law. Just like I'm glad that there are farmers. Really glad. But I personally have not been called to be a farmer in this life. Farming's good, law's good. There's a lot of things that are good. Are you with me? But there comes that point when whatever that is that you are doing, or that thing that you are committing your life to, make it something bigger than making a buck. As I said before, don't pimp your purpose. Don't pimp your purpose. Because if you will stay in a place of discipleship, hear me out here. If you will stay in a place of discipleship, then you will transform wherever you are. You won't think, I've got to get out of this job to be spiritual. Right where you are, bank teller, whatever that is, school teacher, corporate exec, whatever that is, you will bring the consciousness of higher divine purpose to the table and transform that environment right where you are. Stop looking to get out of where you are to be who you're supposed to be. Have the courage to start being who you are called to be wherever you are. I will say that again. Stop waiting to get out of where you are to go about the business of being whatever you're feeling called to be. Have the courage to be that wherever you are. Wherever you are. There's a particular line in this, as I close with it, when Dr. Howard Thurman says that you're at home nowhere because you're not at home somewhere. And I remember when I first read that, I thought, busted. Busted. I actually wrote a piece that is out there. It is all the reasons why, from my perspective, you really need to learn about Howard Thurman, and if you can at all, take his class. It's called Why You Were Urged to Learn About Dr. Howard Thurman and His Transformation Concepts. Just extraordinary man. He was a classmate of King Sr. at Morehouse, and kind of like an uncle to King Jr. King Jr. came from an extraordinary long line of social justice and civil rights activists, begotten. He didn't just hatch. He was begotten. His father, Daddy King, was all that and a bag of chips. And his mother was, and on and on. So we're going to end. I usually don't read to you, but this is just too sweet. You can even close your eyes if you want to. It's a seed upon the wind. So he was born about the beginning of the 20th century. He says he went through 2 world wars and all these other things, and he is known for being one of the founders of the civil rights movement. And by the way, he started the nation's first interracial, interfaith church in San Francisco in the 40s. It's called A Seed Upon the Wind. It says, man without God is a seed upon the wind. What a picture. A tiny living thing awaiting its moment of fulfillment, caught up in the movement of tremendous energy, is at the mercy of forces that are not responsive to its own ends. There is a grand unconscious vitality unfolding with mounting energy, its impersonal purpose. In the grip of something like this, what is a tiny seed? No more than a particle of dust, a nameless nothing. Here is the abandonment of all purpose, stark helplessness without mooring or anchor. The fact that there is locked within the seed a private world of design and pattern makes no difference to the fierce velocities that sweep it on the reckless, relentless way. Man without God is a seed upon the wind. He is a victim of the currents of life that carry him where they will with a bland unmindfulness of purposes and ends which belong to him as a living, thinking, feeling creature. It means that such a man has no sense of center. He takes his clue to all meaning and values from the passing moment, the transitory event, the immediate issue of the day. He is at home nowhere because he is not at home somewhere. The master speaks of this in his direct question, what would a man give in exchange for his soul? But there is a sense in which a man with God is a seed upon the wind. The man who has made the primary surrender, the commitment, the yielding to God at the core of his being. He is one who has relaxed his will to exercise and hold firm the initiative over his own life. This does not come without exacting struggle of the soul. One by one, the outposts of his spirit are captured, retaken, and lost again through hours, months, even years of warfare, until at last the very citadel of his spirit is under siege and he is subjected to an utter yielding. There follows often the long silence when nothing stirs. Then out of the quiet of his vanquished spirit, something stirs, and a new life emerges that belongs more to God than to the self. The movement now rests with the purposes that are beyond the little purposes, with ends that transcend the private ends, the purposes and the ends of God. There is a sense in which a man with God is a seed upon the wind. Let us pray. We're turning in this moment. Stirring up the gifts. Knowing that we have to be anchored somewhere. So we allow the focus of our attention to be riveted right here. Oh, precious Spirit, give us a praying spirit. I'm not just talking about these couple of moments here or there throughout the day when I'm weary and reaching out to you for some help. I'm talking about a praying spirit where I am open and listening, seeing with my third eye, where my heart is being continuously cleansed and purified, where my steps are being ordered and guided, where I'm saying yes, even when I can't see the way. Give us a praying spirit, where we trust you, because we have no other choice. Not simply because we are beaten down and we can't do anything else, but we have no other choice. There are no alternatives. There are no substitutes for truth. And anything else would just be shaky ground. And we won't build in the sand. Oh, in Santa Cruz here, we know a lot about sand. Oh, no. You build upon the rock. A disciple of truth. In this prayer right now, I'm praying for our courage to take that walk. I'm praying for our surrender and the courage to keep walking in the direction of that surrender. And we don't have to know where we're going to know we're headed in the right direction. Straight into the very heart of God. So I pray this prayer of release. I pray a prayer of transcendence. It's a prayer of wholeness and integration. Prosperity and abundance, clarity. All needs met. And in this universal time of energetic quickening. For those whose vibrations energetically are just too big for these body temples. We bless you as you're called into your greater yet to be. And to the multi-dimensionality beyond the body temple. And for those who still have work to do here, take up your bed. We do not yield to any reports of anything other than the whisper of God. And unless we've heard it from God, it ain't necessarily so. This prayer that I'm praying, we just send it out all over the world. Religions, traditions, temples, cathedrals, ashrams, churches, synagogues. Not just formal places, but the temple of our own being. Let this word find a resting place. And last but not least, I say thank you, God, for this energetic vibration known as Inner Light Ministries. For the opportunity to bear witness to your glory. For I know that eyes have not seen nor ears heard what is in store for this ministry. You have promised us time and time again. And we stop waiting for you to show up, and we show up. For our dreams and our visions are waiting for us to come true. This is what I know. I rest in this. I stand in it. And like the tree planted by the river, we shall not be moved. It is good, it is done, it is finished. I release this word and simply allow it to be, and so it is. And so it is.